Hello, everybody. My name is Dylan Blanton, and today I'm going to be presenting a research proposal poster on why is it beneficial for crustaceans to become crab-like. So a little bit of background information. There are really two types of crabs. You have true crabs and you have false crabs. The way I kind of like to relate this to is sandwiches. So you have true sandwiches that evolved from one type of sandwich, and then you have other sandwiches that evolved from something else. So an example of the true sandwiches would be like a turkey and cheese, ham and cheese, Italian, things like that. And then you have sandwiches like the panini that started as something else and then slowly became a sandwich. So the example of like a ham and cheese, that would be a brachyuron or a true crab. And then the panini, that could be an example of a anamuron or a false crab. So our main research plan is to kind of analyze those different morphological features that leads different crustaceans towards becoming a crab-like. So the idea of an organism evolving towards being a crab or having crab-like features is known as carcinization. So it's when something that is a non-crab evolves to become crab-like and have all of those characteristics known as a crab. Sorry, I keep saying crab so much. All right, but the main research plan here is to essentially analyze those morphological features through visual observation. So looking at them, observing them either through video or actual in-person observation. And we'll basically just be comparing the similarities and differences between the brachyurons and the anamurons, as well as other species that are possibly to later evolve into or perform carcinization towards having a crab-like feature. And we're going to basically be seeing if there's a competitive edge that the carcinized organisms have over top of the non-carcinized organisms or the non-crab-like organisms. So kind of like a battle of the why are so many organisms all of a sudden becoming crabs? Because it's a fascinating question of why do organisms that were not originally a crab become a crab? And that's essentially what we're kind of trying to dive into. So why is this important? It is important to understand which traits are favorable because crabs play a key role in both terrestrial and aquatic. So crabs are most of them are able to breathe both air and dissolved oxygen in water. So this means that they hold many different niches in these ecosystems. So that's a very important aspect. Also, if we're able to determine which traits are favored by natural selection, we can kind of determine how natural selection might work in these different circumstances. So if crabs are evolving, or if crustaceans are evolving to become crabs because of their claws, we could understand how natural selection might be playing into that. Whereas if it's over a flattened carapace or whatnot, we could understand a little bit more about how natural selection is playing here. So our methods here is going to be, first, we're going to identify 3 research locations. So a couple locations so far that have been hypothesized is the Galapagos Islands, different seamounts that have high amounts of diversity of crustaceans, and then brackish water where crabs are able to move from freshwater to saltwater and things like that. The next step would be to analyze morphological characteristics of crab-like and non-crab-like crustaceans. So we're going to analyze different characteristics of brachyuron and anamurons and compare those to non-crab-like crustaceans in those areas and kind of see what traits are similar and which traits are different. So do they have same claws between the non-crab-likes and crab-likes, or do they have different claws? All of those different types of things, we're going to be analyzing them and kind of jotting them down, taking pictures, all those fun things. Next, we're going to observe the benefits and disadvantages through behavioral analysis of those characteristics. So we're going to see if those traits are beneficial or non-beneficial. So one example of how we could determine if a trait is beneficial could be if 2 organisms of a crab-like, if a crab-like organism of like a brachyuron is competing with another crustacean that is not considered crab-like or to have undergone carcinization, we would take one trait that they both share in common and see if the crab-like trait is a little bit more advantageous or important or better than the other trait. So this could include feeding mechanisms. So say maybe a brachyuron is able to eat a clam in 30 seconds, whereas another crustacean might take 2 minutes. That would be an advantage that the crab-like morphologies have over top of the non-crab-like morphologies. So next, we're going to compare those, as I just said, to the other crustaceans, and then we're going to determine if those traits can lead to a competitive edge. So we're basically going to do that example that I just said. We're going to do that the whole way through, try to sort of form a list of different examples. And the reason why we feel this is necessary, or I feel that this is necessary, is based on the current literature. So without going too much in depth to our current literature, there's our literature basically gives us the grounds for everything. So they give us the characteristics of carcinization, about the carapace and different body structures and morphological features of carcinized organisms. So another thing that current literature also gives us is the ecological pressures that lead to carcinization. So some of the proposed ones include like the pressure of protection, locomotion, and ability to occupy different niches, as well as each ecosystem kind of having its own variations that lead to the evolution of carcinization. And lastly, an ecological pressure could be temperature and salinity. So salinity plays a major role in the shell structure of crabs, so that could be an ecological pressure leading towards carcinization. Another aspect that current literature gives us is evolution and development, so evo-devo. So a lot of the recent research has shown us that changes in gene expression of Hox genes kind of leads to changes in those morphologies of these crabs. And that's been shown in figure 5 between the similarities of shrimp, lobster, and crab and the different expressions of those Hox genes that they have, and how simply one or two changes in those genes could lead towards maybe a crab or a shrimp becoming a crab or vice versa. Although we have not observed anything where a crab became a different organism, that's what's fascinating about this. So our expected results from this research is that I think we'll find the trait of sideways walking to be favored or more advantageous over avoiding over other organisms because you're able to avoid predators a little bit more. It's kind of like in basketball. If you can move side to side, you sometimes have a little bit of a better advantage. So I also think that we'll find the trait of a flattened carapace to be favored due to it often resulting from increased salinity during development, as well as the benefits of having like the smaller or shortened body. Because if you're about this long, it might be much easier for a predator to grab a bite of your tail. Whereas if you have a shortened and wider carapace, it might be more difficult to be attacked by predators or to have meatier chunks of you taken off when a predator is trying to eat you. So next, I also think that we'll find that not all of the advantages directly act as a competitive edge because like sort of every organism has their own way of doing things. So it maybe the claws in a brachyuron in the Galapagos Islands might have an incredible advantage over other crustaceans, whereas a claw on an anemuron in a seamount out in the middle of the Atlantic might not have any advantage over other crustaceans. So I think we'll find a lot of conflicting ideas, which I think is very interesting about going to 3 different research locations rather than just going to one and trying to determine which morphological characteristics are more or less important. Because if you go to 3 different areas, you can really understand more about, okay, what is the true mechanism leading towards carcinization? All right. So lastly, I think that we'll kind of solidify that Hox genes play more of a role than expected, as well as the direct species interaction being more impactful than global changes. So I think we'll find that Hox genes and how they are expressed is sort of the leading factor towards these changes in morphology leading towards carcinization. And I also think that we'll find more of like the species interactions on a ecosystem or a community level to be more important rather than the global changes that are occurring. So I don't think that sea level rise would have as much of an impact as a food source disappearing on a factor leading towards carcinization. All right, so thank you guys so much for listening. I'm sorry my voice is a little bit raspy, but my references are on the QR code, so feel free to scan that. I'd like to thank Dr. Mark Fink for all of his guided support with this. He was a major help. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Richard Franson for kind of giving me this idea during one of his courses. And it has been a true passion of mine ever since. So please ask me some questions. Yeah, y'all have a great day.